Okay to get started. So welcome to the world of EUC, one of our Insights webinars. My name is Jarian Gibson. I'm here as your moderator, and I'll be riding shotgun with Tim as he goes through his content here. So today we have Tim Mangan, who's going to talk about MSIX ready for prime time, and what about AppV? Tim's always got a lot of good content, so everyone buckle up, and without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Tim.
All right. Thank you, Jarian. Let me get this up. Hopefully by now everyone would be seeing my screen.
Yep.
All right. So at the EUC Independence in DC in October, I gave a very short presentation about MSIX, where we are. That was one of those lightning round talks. And one of the things we wanted to do here when we were setting this up was to sort of expand on that and to give us a chance to get into a little more detail about where we are. But since that time, we've had this additional news now about changes in AppV, and we kind of want to cover that end of the industry as well during this session. So that's the intent. Jarian introduced me, Tim Mangan. Here's my contact information. I think probably everybody in the call probably has a decent idea who I am, so I'm not going to bother to spend a lot of time on that. But what I do want to do is start out by helping make the case for why enterprises are packaging applications. And I told this story in DC that I was at a organization earlier this year in the financial industry. I was running a training class on MSIX. They wanted to move from AppV to MSIX. And on the first day of the class, we had to put the class on pause for a little over an hour, almost an hour and a half. And this is the kind of the backstory of why it's there and why that happened and how this relates to why enterprises are packaging. So this is an organization. They had the IT director told me 301 applications that they were managing it was a Citrix environment. And that morning, one of the applications wasn't working, but it was the most critical application in the organization. They had 30,000 employees, 20,000 depended on using this app to do their job. And it was not working that morning. And so the team ended up getting tasked. So what happened was when the problem happened, the help desk said, oh, Citrix. Citrix looked at it and said, no, it's not us. We think it's probably the back-end web server that's being used for this app, the client-server style application. The web server folks said, no, our stuff's working just great. Go talk to the database people. Database people said, oh, database is just fine. Must be the network. At that point, the problem went to where all problems go, which was back to desktop engineering that owned that application and said, okay, you guys got to fix it. And everyone who had the capability to do that were in that room in the training class. So we had to put the class on pause while they figured out what was going on. So what really happened here? What happened was that I mentioned there were 301 applications on there that this group was managing. That number probably should have been 302. They had a popular third-party browser that was being used as the interface to be able to access the application on the back end. And that browser had updated overnight. It wasn't under management. It was just considered to be part of the server, and it was allowed to auto-update whenever it felt like it. And the updates that day were not backward compatible and broke their in-house built application that these people were depending upon. So as a result, these people couldn't get their job done. And until that problem got solved, nobody was going to be doing any training. So, and those other people weren't doing their job either, which was the more important thing, right? So this is the kind of thing that drives larger enterprises to want to make sure that they have control of the applications. And the application updates is probably the number one thing that they need to have control over so that they can test these things out and make sure that they're properly scheduled and the updates get rolled out safely. And so, this organization now has 302 apps on that list as a result of that day, because that's how they want to control things. There has been some discussion online over the last number of months where we see some folks suggesting that enterprises should not be packaging up applications anymore. And I don't completely disagree with them. I think that enterprises probably spend too much time packaging applications. But there are a lot of good reasons for the enterprise to do that. One I just talked about just this week. Ronald Vonk, who's a guy out in the Netherlands, I believe. Yeah, he's in the Netherlands, just with SparkleFlow. And they've been doing some interesting stuff in the app management landscape, particularly their stuff where they're really trying to become the source of applications that's sort of like the old app deploy website. They're trying to build that up right now. But he wrote this nice article talking about why these applications need to get packaged up in the corporate world. And I think if anyone is getting any pushback that they're hearing, this is a good source of where to go look to say, hey, here are reasons that companies are doing this. So I thought he did a good job on that article. But we do have a lot of different ways that we can prepare applications these days. I'm showing a screenshot here of the Citrix Studio console here, showing you all sorts of different forms of apps that you can deploy out directly in here. And this is in addition to the stuff that Citrix themselves have, like their Citrix app layering for things that you may have built into your PVS or MCS image to begin with, but then layering these things on top for the users that need specific pieces. And they've done a nice job of expanding this list out of the kinds of applications and giving you one place to go at and bring these applications in. And of course, there's some additional vendors that are out there that have their own formats as well. So you got a lot of choices. And there is a question about how many formats you need. I do hear from pretty much any enterprise that tells me they want one way to package up and deliver all of their applications. And that is quite frankly unrealistic. There isn't any one single way to do it. Even if you went back to the MSI and EXT installers and tried to put them all directly in the operating system image, you still wouldn't be able to do what you need for all of the scenarios you need in your environment, particularly those non-persistent VDI or I call semi-persistent, the RDS server or multi-user server scenarios, where the user shows up and we need to figure out what applications to bring in and bring them in rapidly. These older technologies just won't cut it. They're going to have some conflicts you have to worry about. So since I talked to the world of EUC folks, of course, we had these announcements that happened. So these happened at the beginning of November. I was actually at the conference in Germany where they announced these things. And it was quite a shock to the world because, quite frankly, we've known for a long time that AppV is going away. We had some earlier dates, but April 2026 was considered to be the hard date, that after April 2026, there would be no more updates or even security fixes to AppV after that date. And everything I had heard from Microsoft said that there is no appetite in Microsoft to change this. Now, I would love to say that the feedback from all of the enterprises out there changed Microsoft's mind, and Microsoft realized that they were making a mistake and they had to fix this. And that's why they made this announcement of getting rid of the end of life for the client and sequencer portion of AppV. The server is going away, but there's lots of ways to deliver those applications to the client. We don't necessarily need the server. But that's what the announcement was about, that they were removing the end of life for these things. The software that has deprecation notices in it telling you that AppV is going away, that's going to be removed as well. But Microsoft did not necessarily do this because of the feedback from enterprises. That was a big part of it, but it wasn't a driving force to get Microsoft to make that change. That was very clear to me in talking to the folks from Microsoft. It's the other side of the story that also hit that same day, where they announced changes to AVD. So Azure Virtual Desktops. AVD, you can have your apps in the image. You can have your apps delivered through MSIX App Attach, but that was it. And AVD realized that they had a problem. that they couldn't get enterprises to get enough of their MSIX applications working in that environment, and they needed to do more. And they managed to be able to convince Microsoft at the very last minute to expand their capabilities to bring in the AppV format and to get rid of that end-of-life issue. Now, some of that is tied to the fact that Server 2025 also came out and has support for AppV, because it was in this weird mix where it was coming out before the end of life of AppV, and AppV traditionally has been tied to the operating system itself. So we were looking at, on that new server, probably having support for AppV until, well, the 5+5 support you typically get on the server, but no real guarantees from Microsoft and absolutely no word that anything would change for the desktop operating systems. But now with this announcement, they're saying, no, AppV is going to be supported. You'll be able to use it in AVD. And they have a version that is in preview mode, I think, still, that you can go to the AVD console and publish out AppV apps as well directly. So the same way you would put in the app attach disk layer format, you would provide the AppV file, and they would take care of the job of deploying that out to the users that you assign it to. But they also announced future support for other vendors in here. So AppVolumes, Liquidware, Numescent specifically. It is noticeable that Citrix is not on that list. And the good news is I have not had a single conversation with anybody at Citrix about this. So I'm absolutely free to say whatever I want without fear of NDA, which is great. All right, so here's what I think. What I think is these announcements for the other vendors are, quite frankly, little PR stunts. And I wouldn't be surprised that Citrix wasn't offered the chance to provide this type of integration into the Azure portal and said, nah, we're not going to do that, because we know that our customers would never use it. We have our portal that can do multiple formats. And why would they want to go to the Azure portal to deploy the applications when it's only going to support AVD? It doesn't even support WVD. You still would have to go to the Citrix portal to be able to deploy the other stuff. So I think it wouldn't be surprising to me that they don't look at this and say, you know, our customers don't need that. And so maybe that'll change over time. I don't know. But that's sort of my take on that right now. And it sort of helps frame what I see in this AVD story. It's really about getting more enterprises onto AVD. That is Microsoft's motivation in both of these announcements from everything that I can see from Microsoft today. Hey,
Tim, a couple of questions here in the Q&A. The first one is, what about PowerShell application deployment toolkit? I think it's referencing to deployment methods and managing applications.
Okay. Sure. I didn't list, I didn't really get into the deployment techniques here, but yeah, that's certainly one. I think a lot of people are also really interested in WinGet, quite frankly. Although maybe you have to worry about the sources of the stuff that's up there. Yeah.
And then, go ahead. Sorry.
That covers what they were asking.
Yeah. If there's any more, Oscar, put more in the Q&A. If that answers your question, you have more follow-up. And then another one here. If AppV server is not supported after April 2026, then there is no way to track the inventory for AppV applications. So they're asking that. And so I guess you would use like your integration, like Citrix integration or the broker integration type stuff.
Yeah, so I think that last question is really talking about the report server feature from AppV that actually showed the actual usage of the AppV apps. And yeah, we don't have a good solution for that. I mean, certainly there are third-party pieces that will look at where you've deployed the applications to. There are some things that try to provide information about whether or not these things are being used, but none of them were ever as good as the AppV reporting server. But quite frankly, there weren't that many customers who were using it.
And that's all the questions for now. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so let me go on and start making that case again for using either AppV or MSIX, because this really applies to both of them. And there are two pieces to it. Why do I want to have my applications running in these types of formats? The first is the idea of the clean install and uninstall. That when you install that application, And particularly with AppV, that was a big part of the story with AppV. You install your AppV application, you know it cannot possibly break any other application on the box. You also know that you can package it up once and probably use it in multiple different scenarios, different operating systems, different situations, and those work well. And that also applies with MSIX. Now, MSIX does do this step, I think, actually a little bit better than AppV did. In that that uninstall piece is really, really clean. When we installed with AppV, we took all of the things that the application wanted to do in terms of integration, separated them out, but when the AppV client adds that package in, it publishes all of that information out into really the same places that native applications would want to. So with AppV, normally we didn't have a problem, but occasionally you might remove an application and then have a problem with the AppV application and have to repair it because the shortcuts weren't right or the file associations weren't right, because there was always a potential for a little bit of conflict there. And we actually don't see that conflict in MSIX. What Microsoft has done over the last 6 years is create this separate way that applications do those types of integrations. And they're really on a per package basis. So everything goes down, it gets integrated, and can be completely removed. And we don't see these types of interferences that occasionally would occur under AppV, and certainly would happen an awful lot with natively putting applications down and bringing them out. So this is a good reason to be doing this. Other packaging formats also have quite a bit of this as well. But with AppV and MSIX, I think they're really good at doing this. The second piece is the isolation piece. And this is really much more specific to AppV and MSIX. You can kind of do it with some cloud volumes if you add in the old thin app with it. They have kind of a dual thing where you do a thin app and then you put it in a cloud volume to get isolation. But the idea here is that these applications are built with problems in them, or even if the application developer does everything absolutely perfect, they're building on top of a framework like some VC runtime components that have security flaws or potential CVEs over time. And as we bring these applications into our systems, what we'd like to be able to do, and what I think this isolation does really well, is provide that little bit of separation so that if something should happen due to one of those security flaws, it has a tendency to have lesser of an impact in your organization. It's harder for that thing to break out of the bubble and then spread laterally. Doesn't mean it can't. This is not a security solution, but it's an extra piece. And as you think about your organization and the security challenges today, one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, how many people can you actually trust? Okay, you got to trust Microsoft. If you're on the call, you're probably going to be trusting Citrix, but maybe it's Omnissa. Maybe it's AVS, maybe it's, I'm sorry, AWS. Sorry, wrong term there, or Google, but you're having to trust those types of people. You're having to trust some SaaS providers that are out there. But you are really putting your trust into every single vendor of every single application that you're putting down in your system. And we have to do this a little bit better. And I think the isolation becomes really important to help make your systems more secure over time.
Another question came in.
Yeah.
Is MSIX a good way to deploy apps for Intune? We have a customer that has a vendor application where the vendor is only providing an EXE. We haven't had success with pushing the EXE as a Win32 app.
Okay, I guess the answer to that would be it's going to depend on the application and why you're having such a hard time getting the EXE deployed. I mean, certainly not all applications work in MSIX, and I'll be talking about that a little bit here. But assuming the application can work under MSIX, then yes, MSIX becomes a very good way to deploy that through Intune. Okay. All right, but MSIX has had this, this reality that it has not been able to do enough applications. So I've been working with MSIX since it first came out. This is a pie chart from the very first year, right after they released MSIX. And Microsoft, as any vendor would do, came out and said, yeah, we can do 60% of your applications right now. in version 1, but we're going to do better. But I went and tested it, and these are the results that I found. Now, this is a very tough criteria. When I say that something is compatible in this chart, I'm saying that you can take the EXE or MSI install from a user, replace it with this MSIX package, and they wouldn't be able to notice the difference. That whole yellow area there says, well, the basic application works, but there are some things that are missing. So you might find it acceptable, you might not. But initially, this was very, very poor. Now, we did not have the ability to use the package support framework at this particular time. It was something that was available in source code format, and nobody in IT was going to break out Visual Studio and build it to put it in their packages. So we had very limited compatibility. So unlike AppV, which has a lot of remediation built right into the base platform itself, Microsoft, when they created MSIX, they created it both for developers to create applications in that format and for IT to be able to use it. But when IT had needs for older software to run inside the container that needed those types of remediations, they created this package support framework as a way to support that. So we have to add those into the package. And we've been doing that and making the PSF a little bit better over time. And I'll show you some newer numbers here in a little bit. So the way the package support framework works is that you have your application that wants to make calls into the operating system, and we use detours as a way to intercept those calls and make changes. This is actually the same thing that AppV does. It's just that the AppV client has all of these detour intercepts built into it. When we need them for MSIX, we have to add them in, and that's what the package support framework is all about. We have these different components within the package support framework. The PSF launcher is the primary piece. So basically, we replace the shortcut target to this launcher that then runs the application and does the PSF injection into it so that we can get the application to work. It's actually very close to the way that AppV4 used to work, the older version of AppV. They got rid of the launcher in AppV5 and did it through a filter driver. But here, we're doing it through the DLL injection. So we have a number of different types of fix-up. We got these file-based fix-ups. Originally, we had the file redirection fix-up. About 2 years ago, I did a complete rewrite of that to something that's now called the MFR fix-up that works much better. We have a fix-up for registry issues. We have a fix-up for DLL not found issues. We have, I added a fix-up for giving us environment variable support because we didn't have that in the packages with MSIX. And then we've also added some scripting report. And then this year in September, I added the component up there called PSF FTACom, which is really all about fixing a lot of applications that use a lot of COM objects. Microsoft didn't structure the AppX manifest file to be able to bring all of those objects over the way that vendors tend to create them. And so I created a new component to help solve that problem, and it's getting much more of that COM stuff into the packages. We still have some more work to do on the COM for MSIX, quite frankly, but we're getting a lot better now.
There's a question here about why aren't these built in?
Why weren't these built in? My answer would be that it goes back to what I said about Microsoft wanted developers to be producing in these formats. And developers write their code in the newer developer models, that .NET 6, 7, 8. Those are formats which are basically MSIX. They expect to be running under MSIX. There is an unpackaged format they can go, but everything that the developer does will not need these fix-ups because it's a more modern app. And so that was Microsoft's decision on that, is they didn't want to burden the developers with all of this history and try to get them to work in more modern ways that'll make our systems easier to deploy and secure and things like that in the future. So that's why it was an add-on as they went and did it.
And then the next one about scripting support, can you please expand on that one?
Okay, so the scripting support, in particular, if we've got an audience that knows a lot about AppV. AppV has some great scripting support in it for a lot of different scenarios. In MSIX, we've added in scripting support, but it is scripting support that runs the first time the user runs the application. So in the AppV case, sometimes we would use that scripting support to maybe install a device driver at the time the applications being added, or do a customization. So we have the base app and we want it to be able to work in both dev, prod, and test. And we have this customization set up the environment properly for those. We can't really do the driver piece in the scripting in MSIX because those scripts are going to run in the user context, right? When we're adding these packages in, we're running in an admin context or a system context that has the ability to install a device driver. An end user is not going to be able to do that. So we don't have the full kind of support we're used to in AppV, but those are pieces that you would probably still want to pull out of the application and deploy as a separate package, which wouldn't be MSIX. You'd be deploying that natively. If it's a great driver, Microsoft's answer is, oh, it's a device driver. Well, gee, you should be able to do that as a device driver dependency. All the vendor has to do is release their driver in a format that's compatible to be delivered as a MSIX dependency. And of course, only Microsoft has those. So it's not the perfect story.
The next question is using PSF. Oscar says, thank you, by the way, for the last answer. Using PSF concept, can we convert an application to MSIX format that had drivers in it? I think you answered that one just now.
Yep.
Yep. And then the next one is, we have a lot of AppV packages and we are looking to move to MSIX today. In debugging AppV VI, use the /appv ve GUID command to enter the virtual environment to check registry values, etc. Is there a similar way to enter the virtual environment for MSIX?
There is. So there's a PowerShell command to do that. It's called invoke in desktop app or something like that. I don't remember the syntax. I always just do it through my GUIs. So I've got GUI tools that just give you buttons for it. But yeah, we can go in and we can see the application in its containerized form. So we'd see the virtual registry and the virtual files, everything the same way the app would. So we can do that debugging.
And that's all we have for now for questions.
Okay. So when I first started adding in the PSF, this is a slide from a number of years back. And I started releasing these things called the report cards for MSIX. So this is something, it's a PDF you can download from my website. And I've done one every year, usually released around the end of January for the last 5 years. And this is one from 2019, January 2019, where I was looking at taking these applications from Microsoft. And so they, by that point, had increased their acceptability rate from 9 to 20% in their packaging tools. So they made some improvements. But then we looked at the other applications that needed the PSF. We found that basically they were split between half of them that we could see there was a definite need for the PSF and we knew what to add into it. And another half that it was like, we have no idea what's wrong with this app and we can't detect what's wrong automatically. Now, just because we identified the need, that doesn't mean that that was going to turn it into an acceptable app. Because what we found as we started doing this is that the applications would have multiple problems. And at this stage of the process, getting this fixed up was a very serial technique you would use to do it. You'd get the package, you'd see it didn't work. You'd figure out, okay, I need to add this in. You'd test that, then you'd see what the next problem is. And so you had to do this over and over again to finally get the app, hopefully, to work, and that there wouldn't be one of those things in there that we didn't know how to fix yet. So it was very hard to work with MSIX in those early days. But we have continued to make some progress. So this is from 2021. That would be roughly 3 years ago, a little less than 3 years ago, for the report card that came out. And we were getting close to 60% acceptable at that point. And we had those others that are subjective, the blue and the yellow that you see there. But you know, we're continuing to make some progress on it, and we've continued since then. But the other thing that's happened in addition to the PSF is Microsoft has spent a lot of time in expanding the capabilities of MSIX. Now, this is done primarily for the developers. So they've added all of these extension schemas to the AppX manifest file, and then they've been implementing these changes in the operating system to support these new features. And so many of these have been things that we see, and then we have to wait a while for them to kind of come into play, meaning that they're on operating systems that you're deploying today. So some of these, for example, require Windows 11. And I know not all organizations have gotten up to Windows 11 yet. So they may not be able to make advantage of these. But we're getting to the point where a lot of this is now fully available for everybody or should be by the time we get to November of next year when Windows 10 goes away. And what we've been doing is also taking advantage of these new extensions. And that's really allowed us to bring this compatibility up. So this is a chart from the report that I put out last January, where I showed actually a comparison here between AppV and MSIX with the same set of applications and what I see in terms of compatibility. And for MSIX, we finally got up to the point of 82%. I was quite proud of. And with AppV, it's sort of funny. I got a number of 91% here. Now, there's two reasons for the number 91 there. One is I added a whole bunch of applications in, and I only gave AppV one shot at it. I didn't try to diagnose what they were. My traditional number for compatibility with AppV is 98%. So this dropped down a little bit because I didn't really test hard enough. But what I've learned this year, and particularly going back and looking at some of this stuff with AppV, is that the AppV number is actually starting to drop down a little bit. Microsoft hasn't done any development on AppV in quite some time. Apps are modernizing. Some of these applications that are in my mix are things that use .NET 8 in them. And we have some problems with AppV with some of those things. So that AppV number of 98% I've been talking about is starting to drop down. It shouldn't be 91%. It should have been more. I just didn't look at those apps. But over time, we're going to see that AppV number continue to drop down because Microsoft may be supporting AppV. They may make fixes where they need to, but nobody is looking at it to say, oh, I want to make sure that that number for compatibility stays up with AppV. That's just not on the agenda for them. This is a chart I've used. I'm going to go through this one really quickly, looking at the time. I want to make sure we have time for questions about what it takes to produce packages. And that MSI line is where I start. That MSI line assumes that I got someone who has about 5 years of experience. They know how to do package cleanup, but that package cleanup takes time to do right. And so it takes quite a bit of time to do those. But at the end of the day, you can get almost everything done in MSI. Maybe not for all your scenarios because you can't really deploy MSI for dynamic desktops. The AppV number there, much easier to do. All of that isolation I talked about meant that we didn't have to worry about doing that cleanup properly. That AppV curve required someone with maybe about a year's of experience of AppV packaging. But at the end of the line, there were some things that you probably couldn't do in AppV without an awful lot of work. This was my MSIX line I can't quite even see that on my screen. I think it was like 2017 or maybe 2018. And so we have some apps that are good apps that are easy to do. The packaging tool just does its job, that 20% I talked about. And then if you needed the package support framework, there was a gap in here. You had to detect you needed it, why you needed it. And then you got a little bit of bump, but there were a lot of apps that you couldn't do. But over time, we've increased the capabilities of the PSF to raise the size of that bubble, and then done a lot of things to help left shift, okay? Whether it's automatically analyzing and detecting that you're going to need this thing and putting it in, or doing the other extensions that we see for MSIX that the Microsoft's own packaging tool doesn't know about, right? That packaging tool doesn't use a lot of those extensions that I talked about. And so we have to take that as a starting point and then fix up the packages to make it better. So where do I draw that line today? It's sort of like that, okay? This is sort of where we're at. Now, the technique to do this involves using the Microsoft packaging tool and then feeding it through my TMEdit X tool as a way to fix up that package. And so we can even use this in an automated form where we just feed it through and just say, hey, take everything you find and fix it up. And that gets us to the bottom of the first big curve there. About 70% of applications are going to be acceptable with just doing those two things and not having to really think about what's special about this app and what I have to fix. If you need to do stuff beyond that, yeah, you can get another 20% by working on those apps and actually doing a little debugging and figuring out what's wrong and how to adjust the package to work better. But at the end of the day, we still have some apps that we can't do. So this is sort of one of the charts that came out of the report card in last January, and a sort of handwritten some extensions on here. So the green here, those two greens, that represents the 82%. The 30% roughly you get from the Microsoft tool, plus the additional to get you up to that 82% fixing it up. And then on my latest test this fall, looking at the changes I've made this year, we're now going to hit probably the 90% mark in the report that I put out in January of 2025. So the numbers look really good that I should hit that 90% mark when I run this test.
Hey, Tim,
yeah.
a couple are seeing your the Zoom toolbar on their screen, so it's blocking part of your slide there at the top.
Okay, they're having the same problem as me. Okay, cool. I wonder how I moved that.
You should be able to just drag it somewhere else, or make it hide.
Yep, there we go.
Okay. And then question: can we have two bubbles talk to each other like AppV?
Well, you can. And there are a lot of different answers for how to do that. Microsoft has been a little scatterbrained in their approach here. So in AppV, we had a thing called a connection group. And in MSIX, we have a similar thing. It's called shared package container. Shared package container only works on Windows 11 and above. Okay, so we haven't really made very much use of it. But there are also other ways that we can do that. One of them is called a modification package. And what I love about a modification package is you can take a package from a vendor. Let's say they actually deliver to you in MSIX format. And your modification package acts kind of like a transform file from an MSI. It's your special stuff that you want to do to customize that application, but it's a separate piece that you put on top of that application. It's a separate package. When the vendor updates their application, you don't have to touch the modification package. You just update the vendor app and you get those changes applied to the new version of the app too. And that's really cool. They also have this other thing. It's called UAP hosted app. And that's for something where, like, I'm drawing a blank on it. So let me pick a different one then and say the Java app, right? That could be declared as a hosted app, and then you have another package that wants to leverage that as the executable. We'd see people want to be able to do that type of thing. That is one that we're not really sure exactly how it's supposed to be used. Microsoft hasn't done a good job of documentation, and that's something we're sort of looking at now. But we have these different techniques that Microsoft has made, and we're not always sure which is the right choice for us to use. Any more questions before I move on?
So here's an interesting one. Oh, real quick, Michael Nihas, I see your hands up in the attendees list. If you have a question, please use the question and answer function. And then the next question is, so who will build these great tools once you decide to retire in the future, Tim? Are there other players doing the same?
Who said I'm going to retire? Are there other players out there building these great tools? I think not a whole lot, right? So we had folks from like Advanced Installer and Master Packager that started really getting into this stuff. And I think they've kind of backed off a little bit right now. My own opinion is that we're sort of consolidating on Tim has the answers for these things when you want to go MSIX. Something's going to have to happen to that. I mean, I suppose eventually I do have to retire, but no, I don't have any plans.
Jim Oil says, Tim will never retire. I'm also taking notes, FYI.
All right, good. Any other questions?
That's all we have for now. Thank you.
All right. So quick slide here on how we do this, right? And then I'm covering both the AppV and the MSIX case. So when I want to make really good AppV packages, you start with the Microsoft AppV sequencer. It does have some bugs in it, and I have a tool called TMEdit that will find those bugs and fix the packages for you. It's nowhere near the life-changing application that TMEdit X is for MSIX. With a lot of the stuff that we're fixing up in TMEdit, it's really nice to haves. It's things that make your package the best package it could possibly be. There are a couple of sequencer bugs that we do need to fix up. One of them is the short name problem that they have. And then it doesn't cover all of those types of shortcuts that people put down. Like if you want to have a shortcut that just points to a CMD file, that's not supported. So we have a way to fix that up in the tool. I also have a free tool that's called AppV Manage that folks would be using in the packaging process once they have their AppV package. Rather than have to go to a server and do a deployment, that gives them a single tool to deploy the app on their system, test it, give them some debugging tools associated with it. We're using MSIX. We're using the MSIX packaging tool, and in TMEditX to do all of this, inject the PSF, fix it up, clean up everything that we need to do there. And then TMEditX includes a component called MSIX deploy, which is sort of the equivalent of the AppV Manage. So maybe you want to get it into MSIX app attach format, and you want to actually test that on your local VM rather than have to go up to AVD to deploy and test. You'd be able to do that rapidly. So those are the techniques that we're using today. So I just hit, yeah, I'll just hit the play. I'll just talk a little bit as this thing goes. This is just to give you a quick view of fixing up a package in TMEditX. And quite frankly, the TMEdit works very much the same way, where what we're going to do is we're going to
Hey, Tim, sorry to
find the right button.
It's not playing.
Yeah, I just noticed that. Okay, there it goes. So once you find the right button, it'll open up the the package that you have, and it's going to run an analysis. And when it's running that analysis, what it's doing is it's looking at all of the things that are inside that package that show exactly how the application intended to be installed when it was installed natively. So all of the pieces that were there, they're still there in the package. And we use that and compare it against the full capability of what MSIX can support, and looking for the signs of things that we need these different pieces of the package support framework. So in this case, I think I brought up probably 7-zip, and I just hit the just do everything for me button, right? And there's a command line option to do that too that my third-party vendors use. The other thing that I do in any of the packaging I do, and this applies to AppV as well, is I try to pull out information from the application while you're packaging to tell you about this application. Specifically, how does this application interface with the operating system? You got some shortcuts, you got some file association, you have some shell extensions that are in here, maybe a protocol handler. Well, those are things that maybe you need to make sure get tested before you release that application. And understanding those things really help you do your job in a much faster basis. And here we're also showing the things that we fixed in that automated fix-ups that we had here. At the the bottom of the report, and this one wouldn't have one, we have an area of things that we see in the package that we don't know how to fix. This is this unfixable issues you see on the screen here. I don't have any in this package, but there might be a few COM objects that I can't fix up today. And if so, we're going to point that out to you so you're aware that, hey, okay, maybe I need to make sure that this app gets some really good testing before we go to production, because it might be that one weird feature that a few users use that are really important that we need to hit on it. Adobe Reader is a good example of an app here as well. So Adobe Reader is one of those apps that's been around forever. Components of this goes back to the days of Windows NT, and they're still there in the installer they do today. Now, this app works just fine with the automated fix-up, but there's going to be a bunch of things that end up in that I can't fix these things list. Now, some of those, as we go through, we would actually be able to see and say, oh, well, that's because they're still installing a search handler shell extension. This is something that was deprecated in Windows XP and is no longer supported in Vista and above. And today's Adobe Reader installer still puts and registers those components down in the system. They just don't do anything. Well, we see those in the package, and we actually have no way to put them in the manifest file. So we're telling you, hey, this is something that's unsupported. But as you get into it, you'll recognize, oh, well, that's something that nobody's using anyway. It's not a big deal. But it's also going to have a few other things that we can't deploy. And as far as we can tell from our testing, they're probably not used either, but I can't detect that for you. But we're trying to provide that type of information out as part of that whole packaging process. That's the idea here. Let's see if I can get past this now without starting the video again. Of course I can't. Of course I can't. Let me just jump here this way. Why didn't it jump? Try that again. There we go. Okay, I did want to spend a minute here to talk about some of the stuff I alluded to here, where TMEdit now is starting to be used by these other companies as part of their products. So these are 4 companies, Jariba, AppCure, Adventix, and Remo3, that now provide integration in their products so that you can use TMEdit within it. And so all of these companies are looking at the bigger picture of what you need to do to prepare your applications and get them ready for delivery. And they all have their different take about what they're doing and what they think is important to the customers. But these are the things that you probably should be looking at today if you're doing any application packaging. And one of these companies is probably the right mix for you. So you're going to take a look at what they focus on and what they think is important and see how that matches up with your needs. But through all of them, you can get the TMEdit X piece. Adventix also added integration for TMEdit, which was a kind of sort of a surprise. We were on the road with TMEdit X, and then this announcement happened about AppV continuing on, and they have been a traditional AppV company. They've been sort of the replacement for the AppV server folks for a while now. So we went ahead and added it in for them as well. But these are things that you'd want to look at in using this. So where are we with MSIX, right? So I want to make sure I finish up with these 2 questions. Where are we with MSIX? Well, as far as I'm concerned, MSIX is ready today to be your first choice for packaging if you choose to do that. We can do 90% of the applications. We can't do the 100%, but we can hit that 90% number. And there is no packaging format that's going to give you 100%. And I think it's a good spot to start. MSIX will be delivering applications in essence, the native Microsoft way going forward. This is the future of applications. And I think we're going to see things like AppV over time start to degrade. You still want to be going that way. But with AppV, we were at this end of life. This is a tweet that I put out. Well, I guess it wasn't a tweet, it was LinkedIn. Sort of encouraging customers to say, hey, this end of life date's coming. I guess this doesn't apply anymore. But you really should be looking at it as in what you've got is a breather here. You've got time to worry about your Windows 10 migration, or thinking about Server 25 coming out, or maybe some other aspect of migrations that you're in the process of, and getting yourself onto AppV and off of AppV and into something else like MSIX doesn't need to be quite as high priority as it was before, but you shouldn't ignore it. We have to be concerned that AppV will not be there forever. So I kind of break down advice to customers under these 4 categories, depending where they are. If you're an AppV customer and you hadn't even started a migration plan right now, well, you just got a reprieve. I'm sorry, you should have been working on that already, but you got a reprieve. You can stay where you are for now, but don't let that settle in and try to stay there forever. You should start moving. If you're an AppV customer and we're already in the process of migrating to MSIX, I don't think these announcements from Microsoft make any big change to you. Maybe it takes the pressure off of getting that done rapidly, and you can focus some energies on other things. But I think what you're doing is good. If you were migrating from AppV to some other vendor that was out there, right? You're trying to put everything to Citrix App Library. Maybe you decided to go to VMware Volumes or Numesin or Flex apps. I don't think this announcement really changes things for you. I'm never going to say that you made the best choice on any of those, but if those technologies are working for you, you should just stay the course of where you are. And again, maybe you don't have the same level of need to get it done immediately. If you're a fresh customer that hasn't used AppV at all, what do I tell those people? I actually have no idea what to tell those people. I can't imagine recommending they start with AppV today. I think that's probably a mistake. But I think that's something we're going to have to figure out over time. Okay, and that was actually my last slide, Jarian.
All right, so then we have a couple things here. Looks like the one question was the transform tool name used for MSIX. That was the modification packages, or which was that one?
Yeah, it's called modification packages.
Okay. Oh, looks like Jim answered in the chat too as well. Thank you, Jim. Can you please elaborate on how apps encounter auto update in MSIX? Should we enable auto update or disable it?
The application will not be able to update itself if it's in an MSIX package.
Yep.
So if the vendor has one, you do need to get rid of that. Yes. The idea from Microsoft is that MSIX itself at the platform level has an update mechanism. So that someone could apply the new package and have that trigger the update, and the vendor shouldn't be doing that directly in their own software. Hopefully the vendors will learn that lesson. You know, the vendors, it's sort of weird. I look at these vendors, it's like, if you look at their actual revenue, most of their revenue is coming from the enterprises, because when the enterprise buys it, they buy a lot of copies. And yet they keep building in these features that are designed for the consumer. That's what the auto updater for. It's there for the consumer. And it should be easy to defeat. And these people have the developers who make these things have absolutely no clue. As I talk to those folks, they have no clue that enterprises don't like that feature.
The next question, having a report per packaged app will be nice. PDF, something that can be imported into a CMDB or saved for documentation. Management loves this kind of stuff.
Okay, well, the report that I showed is an XML file. And that's kind of how I'm doing it. I decided not to go out to a PDF because I actually wanted to do something that other tools could consume that information and do their own magic on top of it. Right? But you know, if there ends up being a need for a PDF version of it, it's something that could be considered. I actually have some software that does that. I was doing a little playing around with AI, taking all this information from all my packages and putting it into PDF, and then sticking it into AI and seeing if AI could say some stuff for me and combine it with stuff out on the web. And that experiment actually didn't work out very well because there's so much wrong information on the web that that AI couldn't come up with the right answers. So.
Does TMX edit package, or is it just for editing existing MSIX packages?
TMEditX does not create packages, no. I do support packages that were created by the Microsoft packaging tool. From AppCure has their own packaging engine, and we take those in. We take packages from Master Packager and Advanced Installer. Those are fully supported. And if there's some other package, Jariba has their own packaging engine as well. And if there's others out there, it probably works for those, but there might need to be some small adjustments. And I'd love to hear about that so we get them fixed up.
When will the install speed match AppV?
The install speed, okay, so now we're really talking about the app attach versus AppV, right? MSIX is still a lot faster than native, but I have some numbers. I don't no way I can bring that up here. But for MSIX app attach, those numbers are a little bit slower than AppV. Quite frankly, I think they're close enough that it's fine. As I look at what the technologies are doing while you're adding that package in, I'm not quite sure why MSIX is slower for the app attach than AppV is. I think there's opportunity for Microsoft to address that. Hint, hint, Jim, hint, hint. But I think the numbers are good enough, quite frankly.
And then are you going to be sharing the slides for this session?
Do you have a way for me to do that?
I believe we can. We can send them out to...
And I'm happy to, yes.
Okay. And the last question, someone who has never used MSIX, do you have a recommended source for learning how to, or any guides? Here you go.
Oh, thank you for teeing me up. Yeah, I should come to one of our training classes. We run training classes, both an online version. We got a class in February folks can sign up for from wherever they are. We have a pretty neutral time zone unless you're in the Pacific. And then we do in-person classes as well. We've got classes scheduled in the Netherlands and in Switzerland that are already on the schedule for next year. We'll probably do something here in the US as well. Sort of interesting with the training though. I used to have, my class used to be both AppV and MSIX. We train you on both because technologies are so close. that it just made sense to have one class and do that. We actually dropped the AppV class because people weren't looking for AppV training. And I don't know if this announcement is going to change that. And I have to go back and maybe just have a special AppV class. I really don't think the volume would be enough to do anything other than maybe an online class for that. But yeah.
And then they're asking for a link.
A link? A link. Yeah, well, for the class that I just talked about, you would go to www.tmurgent.com. And you could find them there. I think I have the website on that slide. Didn't have the website on that slide. Let's see.
And then while you're doing that, Jim says app attach is faster. MSIX registration is the slow bit there. It's less than a half second for the app attach bit.
Okay, last time I tested it, I did not see those numbers. I'm suspecting he's not covering all three aspects on the app attach when he gives a number that low, because you have the mounting, the staging, and the registering. But Jim can tell me I'm wrong. That's fine.
And then since Numero 3 now integrates TMX Edit or TM Edit X, can we expect 90% conversion to MSIX?
90% conversion. I think that's where I expect that number to be when I complete testing. I'm in the process of testing for the next round for the report card that'll come out at the end of January. And it looks like that's where those numbers are with the versions that are in production right now. I might end up needing to make a few tweaks to actually hit that number between now and then, but that's pretty much where we are. But you know, hitting 90% really does mean that you learn a lot about MSIX, and quite frankly, that probably means coming to my training classes to be able to do it. But yeah, I think you should be able to do that. Now, every enterprise is going to have a different set of mixes of apps, right? But that's where I believe we're at. And
if you notice there, Softricity is what became AppV on this slide here that Tim's showing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I forget. Sometimes I forget that people don't know these things, right? I was hoping I had the website on there, but it's TMurgent.com.
Yeah, we put in the chat. Do you want to hand me back the presenting so I can close out, please?
Absolutely. There you go.
So let me share my screen here real quick. So thank you, Tim, today. And a couple things as we close out. The recording will be on YouTube. So for those of you who want to watch this again, it'll be on our YouTube channel. We do have some upcoming events. So you see here that on January 7th, Ray Davis is going to have an Insights webinar about the trenches of Teams 2.1. January 16th, if you are in the local Kansas City area where I live, we are having our in-person meetup. January 17th, we were having the webinar with Dave Brett to launch his Profilix community version. On January 22nd, we will have the Nutanix Elevate webinar for AHV for EUC 2025 edition. And then, just so you know, Tim mentioned EUC World Independence, which we just had in October in Silver Spring, Maryland. We are going to have EUC World 2025 in August of next year in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So there's the info there where you can get kind of the save the date, sometimes to get notified, and we will have more details of that coming soon for EUC World 2025. Prize giveaway. I believe the prize giveaway, let me find it here real quick, is going to be Oscar Garcia. So if you want to reach out to HQ/Jen will reach out to you for your information. That way you can get your World of EUC shirt. So look forward to that. With that, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tim. A lot of good things here in the chat about thanking you, and also in the Q&A. So a lot of good stuff today, a lot of good interaction.
Thank you, Jarian.
All right. With that being said, everyone have happy holidays, and we will see you later. Thank you.